Support for Connect the Bay and its community outreach initiative has been provided by the North Bay Leadership Council.
On this edition of Connect the Bay, Erasing the Gap, Conversations with Women Leaders. In this hour, we'll talk with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and with Dolores Huerta, the union leader who's now fighting for immigrants, low-wage workers, and her own legacy as co-founder of the United Farm Workers. Live in our studio, we'll be joined by women leaders in politics, education, and the nonprofit world. And we'll learn what these women believe is left to be done to achieve the goal of gender equity. I'm your host, Steve Mencher, and we want to remind you that this is your show. Here's Kaya Kramer at our social media desk to let you know how to make your voice heard during our broadcast.
Hello everybody, this is Kaya Kramer, and thanks so much, Steve, here at the social media desk at NorCal Public Media. If you have any questions for us today about gender equity and what it means to be a woman leader in your experiences, good or bad, give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. If you have questions and you want to put them forward, find us on Facebook, facebook.com/NorCal Public Media. If you've shut down your Facebook account and you still have an Instagram account, find us on Instagram.com/NorCal Public Media and tweet us, just like the president, twitter.com/NorCal Public. We've got a question came in here via email from Aaron Taylor. Women lead in a very collaborative way. If this is your leadership style, how has this helped or at times hurt you at different points in your career? Another question we have here via email from Aaron Taylor is, what have you been able to do that others cannot because of this unique collaborative approach? Here at NorCal Public Media, we are answering these questions. We're talking about what it means to be a woman in the society, what it means to struggle with trying to find out why it is that you can't get paid as much as a man in this society. Again, if you have any questions, give us a call, 1-800-287-2722, and let us know what the struggle is happening for you at this point in time. What we're trying to cover here is the progress of what women are doing in society. As a trans woman of color, I find myself constantly asking this question here. What is my role here? How can I contribute? And so if you too are asking those questions, let us know. Make your voice heard here at NorCal Public Media's Connect the Bay.
Okay, thanks so much, Kaya. Now, 2 weeks ago, I was at Ames Research Center in Mountain View, the Silicon Valley outpost of NASA. It was a forum there sponsored by NASA and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Women from tech and finance talked about leadership, and we were welcomed there by Megan McCarthy. Megan is Chief Deputy Astronaut at NASA, and she made this promise.
When we at NASA achieve our goal of returning to the lunar surface by 2024, we will also accomplish a first when a woman plants her boots on the moon for the very first time.
Astronaut Megan McArthur, and now we're going to meet two more women leaders in our region. Lynda Hopkins was elected Sonoma County Supervisor representing District 5 in 2016, and Karin Demarest is Vice President for Programs at the Community Foundation, Sonoma County. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Steve. Good to see you.
Lynda, does it matter to you that in 4 years a woman is going to be standing on the moon?
It does matter, and I'm thrilled at a moonshot like that, but I also want to acknowledge that we have a lot of steps we need to take here on Earth to actually achieve gender equity, and I think we need to do both. It's not, the moon versus, say, affordable childcare or paid family leave, but I do think that right here on this planet, we need to do some work as well.
What about you, Karin?
Well, absolutely. I mean, these are milestones that bring the consciousness up about how important it is to have women in equal positions, but I echo what Lynda said. I mean, we do have big issues to tackle, childcare being one of them. Lynda is on the First Five Commission, and she knows and advocates so strongly for pay for people who work in the early childhood field, as well as just support for women who need to use those services.
Now, childcare must be very much on your mind. I know you were chuckling the other day. I saw you both at a panel up at the Paradise Ridge Winery, and you were kind of making fun of the headline that appeared in the Press Democrat that says, Lynda Hopkins, Supervisor, has baby in office for the first time.
Yes, they almost made it sound like in between meetings I just sort of popped under my desk or something like that. Nothing of the sort. But it is kind of crazy to think that on the Board of Supervisors, I am the first woman who has actually had a child, given birth to a child, while also holding an elected office. And to me, the fact that that's news is concerning. I really think that it needs to be something that is commonplace. And I also found it interesting that while that is news, there have been men in the past who have not given birth but had babies while they were, with their partners while in office, and that never made the headlines.
All right, now both of you were really spot on, and the way you might answer the question that's come into us from social media, I heard you talking about this the other day at Paradise Ridge. The idea that women might have a slightly different style, a collaborative style that works for them in a different way than men. It's not that women have to say we are leaders exactly in the way men lead, but help us understand that a little bit.
Well, I think one of the things we talked about at the panel, which was such an honor to have a group of women talking about women leadership together, was this notion of sisterhood. That we really need to elevate each other as we step into leadership roles and be certain that we're making the field available to all. So I think, yes, we need to be doing this together.
Now, do you have a different relationship with the women, say, on the Board of Supervisors than you do with the men?
I actually feel very lucky that we have a very collaborative board, sort of regardless of gender. But I would agree that just sort of my style personally in leadership, and what I see many other women leaders as well, tend to be sort of more teamwork oriented and kind of less authoritarian. So it isn't about coming in and sort of steering the ship and being, an executive and giving top-down orders. It's more about what are the different capacities that my team has, and how can I elevate them in their leadership style to really sort of bring the whole team up together.
Now, women are coming up as leaders, and also I read in the paper the other day that people of color, and especially women, are getting jobs, new jobs in the economy more than other folks. So women of color are now the most important new employees in the entire economy. And yet, the troubling part of that is that African American women, black women, are still making 61 cents on the dollar that men. So how can we process kind of both of these things at once?
I think there's something to celebrate there, absolutely. We need to be working together in that way. We need to elevate women of color and women in general. The fight for equal pay is a complicated one. Lynda, do you have anything?
There was actually a study that came out in Sonoma County, sort of done by North Bay Jobs with Justice, that actually identified that women of color were just, there was no equal pay, right? They were really, really struggling to attain even the wages that white women were, and then of course white women are still struggling to attain the wages that white men are. And so you really see this intersectionality of both gender and ethnicity really, really just creating this socioeconomic disparity in our community. I think we need to do that by raising the minimum wage overall, but then also doing things that actually take care of working women, policies like paid family leave, looking at access to affordable childcare. And then the flip side of access to affordable childcare is that making sure our childcare providers, many of whom are women of color, are actually being paid a living wage for doing that critical work.
Well, that sounds really important. And it also is important, I think, for us to understand what are the implications of the Me Too movement in the workplace. And I wanted to discuss that with the two of you. Karin, what's your feeling about that?
Well, the Me Too movement is something that I think has empowered women to speak for themselves in a moment in time when we needed it most. The complexity of being a woman in a workplace where there is the opportunity for being oppressed sexually by people in the workplace, it is time for us to attack that issue together. And I think we've seen it publicly, but it needs to really go into the workplace for each one of us individually. And I think we've been empowered to do that because of the movement itself.
I know we're not going to talk too much about politics today, but this morning's newspaper, talking about Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, and the idea that things that he may have done as a younger person that showed disrespect for women, several women, are now kind of important and coming back to bite him, and there may be now impeachment because of that. What do you think about that?
I think that there is there can be tremendous power in vulnerability, and the vulnerability of millions of American women across the country coming together to share their stories of sexual abuse and harassment has actually allowed us to start to have these kinds of conversations. I think that before, that was just kind of business as usual. It was swept under the rug, but it's really the power of the individual stories that I think are starting to turn the tide on public sexism and workplace harassment.
All right, now there's sort of a good news story that we can talk about a little bit, and that's women in sports. And the idea that the women on that soccer team, not only did they win their games, not only are they best in the world, but immediately they said, okay, this is our moment to say we also deserve equal recognition, we also deserve equal pay. How important is that, Karin?
Well, absolutely. When people have a platform like the women's soccer team, that is an opportunity to bring to light for many people who may not hear that message, to bring that to light to say, yeah, this is crazy. That this team is not making as much as the men's soccer team is absolutely crazy. And so it brings it to people who really need to hear that message and who could potentially affect change.
What about you, Karin? What do you think about the sports?
I really agree, actually. And one thing, I think that you're a surfer, is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. Well, so Mavericks was a fantastic example. You know, surfing for a long time, like soccer, has been a very male-dominated sport. And yet, actually, Mavericks, there was a lawsuit, and they actually were required to provide equal pay to the female surfers in terms of equal prize money being awarded.
All right. Well, Lynda Hopkins, Supervisor Lynda Hopkins, thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday. And Karin will be back with us in a few minutes with one of Sonoma County's up and rising leaders. All right. Assistant News Director Adia White took some of the questions we've been considering to the Berryessa Farmers Market in San Jose last weekend. She was joined by cinematographer and producer Isabel Fisher. Let's meet some of the women they talked with out on the street.
Can you tell me about a time where you held a leadership position and what that was like for you? In my undergrad, I was vice president of a nonprofit organization called China Care, and I really liked it because, well, our organization was mostly women. We had maybe like one guy who was an officer, so it was nice working with other women, and I don't think being a woman prevented me from assuming a leadership role or affected anybody's opinion of me as a leader. I think it's good that more women should be in leadership roles to speak up for other women.
And do you feel like it's affected you since then in other positions moving forward?
No, I've never seen myself being a woman being any kind of hindrance to me taking on a role. But I have noticed if I see more women in leadership roles, I'm like, oh, I want to be part of that.
All throughout high school, I was one of the leaders, a part of my LGBT group. And it was actually kind of nice because we originally started as like a handful of people, and by the time it was my graduation year, we had to relocate because we had so many people. So I guess being a part of that and being one of the leaders of that was kind of nice.
I'm currently a team lead. I lead about like a group of like 5 engineers or so. We work on a product called WordPress.com. Basically help make software. Yeah.
How comfortable do you feel in a leadership role, and do you feel like your gender affects that in any way?
I would say like, so Automatic is actually a fully distributed company, so we work completely remotely, and I have colleagues from all over the world. So I think that often like gives us like a little bit, it reduces friction, I think, for women leaders.
Can you tell me about a time that you held a position in leadership and what that was like for you?
During school projects, I'd usually be the leader for them, organize them, put them together.
And how was that for you? Did you feel comfortable?
Yes, because it's easy for me to take charge of what I'm doing.
Do you feel like your gender has affected that, either making it easier or harder?
Harder because people don't trust girls as much to do things than trusting a boy to do it. But once you can prove yourself, they'll believe you.
How have you had to prove yourself?
Just do the work. It's more work for a girl, but...
How do you feel like you're going to take on that challenge as you get older?
It'll get easier since you've had more practice with it, but it'll probably be the same thing.
Okay, later we'll hear from women in Santa Rosa, and Assistant News Director Adia White will join us live. But first, During NASA's Silicon Valley Summit, much was made of the oncoming centenary of women's suffrage. It was very much on the mind of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi as she addressed the assembled women in the tech and financial sectors. She talked first about visiting the White House under George W. Bush, and afterwards you'll hear a question I was able to ask her directly about why she thinks women in California especially have been so successful at gaining and holding positions of leadership.
When I first went to my first meeting as leader, not speaker yet, but as leader to the White House, there's a meeting that happens with President, Vice President, and then the Democratic and Republican House and Senate leaders. It's a small meeting. So I was going to my first meeting, having been elected by my colleagues to this position, and we didn't have the majority, so I wasn't the speaker yet. So I go to the meeting, and I had no apprehension about going to the meeting, my friends. And I love seeing all these women here, these young women here. I had no apprehension because I've been to the White House so many times as an appropriator of intelligence. I had been head of the Intelligence Committee for the Democrats and this. I didn't even think of being concerned about it until I walked into the room. And then as I went into the room and the door closed behind me in the small room around a small table with those people, I realized that this was unlike any other meeting I'd ever been to in the White House. In fact, it was unlike any meeting that any woman had ever been to in the White House. Not a cabinet meeting, which is a wonderful thing, but you're appointed by the president. Your voice is derived from his or her, now, hopefully soon. But nonetheless, I was there not as an appointee of the president. I was there as elected by the Democrats in the Congress of the United States. Co-equal branch of government, separation of powers, my own voice with the beautiful diversity of our caucus behind it. Anyway, so I sit down. President Bush was president, George W. Bush, lovely, gracious as always. You know how gracious he is. Lovely, welcoming, and the rest. But as he was welcoming the first woman to such a meeting, making that point, I was feeling really closed in my chair. I mean, it was like I've never had that sensation before, nor since, and I was really crowded on my chair. And as he was being gracious and lovely, I was pressed into my chair. And there it was, Susan B. Anthony, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Alice Paul. They were all on the chair, and you name more. They were all on the chair. We were squeezed in. And I could hear them say, "At last, we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone. And my first thought was, we want more. We want more.
Madam Speaker, you said that there's something particular about the Bay Area that lends itself to women being in leadership. What do you think that is?
Well, I think the support that women have for other women, it removes all doubt. You know, again, this is not a zero-sum game. If some women succeed, then it's at the expense of others. And when women see women succeed, it gives them confidence and courage to go forward. And I know it did to me, and I hope that my leadership encouraged others to do so as well. We truly believe that when women succeed, America succeeds.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. And Jerlena Griffin-Desta joins me now. She's the Chief of Staff to President Judy Sakaki at Sonoma State University and the Associate Vice President for Strategic Initiatives and Diversity there. Jerlena, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
You know, this is becoming a kind of a theme of our hour today, the idea that women in leadership are starting to look around them and decide that when they can connect with other women, when they can support other women, that's really an advantage that they have, and in a sense almost an advantage over men. What do you think about that?
I think that that is absolutely true. I think that we know that in the company of women, whether you are not a woman or a woman, wherever you are on the gender spectrum, there is something about the feminine dynamic, right? That is, when pulled together, when harnessed, creativity flows. The sense of sisterhood and collaboration is present. And therefore, I think solutions to some intractable issues get tackled differently. And I think that that's part of why people talk about women leadership as being somewhat nuanced differently than men. And it's not to say that men don't have the capacity for that. It's part of innate, part in terms of who we are as women. It is part of our training, and it is part of choices that we make about how we want to be in this world. So yes, I think there is something to that.
Sure. In a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Kim Churches of the American Association of University Women, or AAUW.
Yes.
And they're starting this terrific program. They plan to train 10 million women, mostly, but men as well, in negotiating skills to help them figure out how to close that pay gap. They've identified the idea that part of the pay gap is the fact that women aren't asking for the same things that men have a tendency and are comfortable asking for. So how do you address that on the campus of Sonoma State, where you're sort of second in command?
Well, I'm not sure if I address it directly at Sonoma State. It certainly is true within higher education. I was fortunate to be part of the American Council of Education Fellows Program, where it trains higher education leaders who they think may have the capacity to be president one day. And one of the things that was a segment of that is actually talking about that, how women lead in higher education, and how I remember my mentor made an important point to me. He was a past president of a university, and he said, "You know what, Jerlena? You're being too tentative when you're talking about your skill set. You're being too nice. You're being too proper about how you're selling yourself." And this notion, I was thinking, I'm kind of assertive, you know, I'm from the South, you know. And he said, no, you know what men do? He said, men don't necessarily come to the table as prepared as maybe the job description wants. He says, you know what we do? We fake it until we get the job. And then we hire somebody to help us make sure we deliver.
So fake it till you make it.
Until you make it. And I thought, oh, that's what's been happening all this time, right? So I think that for me, when it comes to this notion, as you're mentioning about how do you ask for what you know you deserve, we're just not sometimes trained to do that. But I tell you what, where I have hope is the young people coming in now. Who are leading, as our previous guest talked about the Me Too movement, or who are leading some of our policy issues related to gun control. They are getting trained on how do you assert yourself in these potentially male-dominated spaces. And so I have a lot of hope for us, as much as I consider myself still somewhat young. I still think that that generation of young female leaders and young leaders in general kind of have a bit of something to say about that, and that's encouraging.
Yes, we're seeing that in every part of American society. I know on Friday, the 20th, there's a worldwide movement to talk about the environment, and it's the young women leaders who everybody's eyes are on. And the same thing with gun control, as you say, that it's the women and young girls who are taking the lead, and they're not afraid to say, this is what needs to change in our society, and this is what we need to do.
Absolutely, and it's very encouraging. And and part of that too is, we often think about our generation and how we can help teach and look with this current generation to show like what we've been through and how our lessons learned and promising practices. I actually have come by working in higher education, also particularly at Sonoma State University, that the students are teaching us. The students are teaching us about what it means to not necessarily have the fog of the history, or the tentativeness, or this idea that, we have to kind of be too proper about things. They're teaching us how to kind of go in there and do it. And so when I do training and when I talk to young people, one of the first things I ask is, what can I learn from you? What is it that I need to know about you and your generation and your people, so to speak, so that I can shift and adjust to meet the changing ways that we are now kind of showing up in this world with these young folks.
And you've created some fabulous training, I know, starting from when you were down at the UC system in Berkeley. And this was training to make people aware of ideas about race and ideas about class and ideas about gender.
That's right.
Since we're talking about women today, can you tease out some of the ideas that were specifically about gender and understanding how to own your own gender?
Yeah, I helped create at the UC Berkeley campus years ago what we call CDADs, Critical Dialogues Across Differences. We love to have an acronym for everything. And part of that effort was to recognize that we don't teach in our anywhere, even in our civic courses, how to have critical constructive dialogues. And we know that women show up in that space sometimes differently than men, even though I'm being very binary here for the purpose of our conversation, that there is a way, there is an approach to how you tackle these difficult issues. So when we would have students come together across the various differences and we would do the segment on gender, it was very clear for us that the ways that women would talk about things that were difficult to discuss or that could have been intractable, that they were able through language, body language, through being just thoughtful about even how to sometimes that's a double-edged sword, of course, but how to present material, that there was a way in which we could access that difficult piece that sometimes in some other settings it seems too academic, or we're being too higher edsy, we're being too scholarly, when women would really talk about it from the heart and talk about experiences and are able to really kind of paint a picture, of what it is that they are expressing. And I think that has been a very, very helpful way to kind of bring in young people to the conversation about how do we even talk about this stuff.
Fabulous. Well, Jerlena Griffin-Desta, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to go back to our social media desk where Assistant News Director Adia White has joined Kaya Kramer.
Thanks, Steve. I want to talk with Kaya for a moment, not about social media, but about her role as a leader in our community. Kaya, you're the creator of the Queer Life radio show. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the work that you do here?
Absolutely. I created the Queer Life radio show because when I first came out in 2010 as a transgender woman of color, I did not see examples of trans folks out there that I could aspire to. I did not understand that there was a way that you could come out and be yourself and be accepted in this world. The Queer Life radio show was LGBT news, modern perspectives, roundtable discussions, and interviews. And one of the things that was just so important was making sure that every aspect of the LGBTQIAA, the entire acronym, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and asexual community was being spoken for, was being heard.
And so you've been a role model to many, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about who your role models were. Did you feel like you could find people that represented you and were sufficient?
As somebody who feels like I want to be putting myself out in the world and expressing what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a transgender woman, what it means to be a transgender woman of color, the role models that I looked up to as a child were people like Stephen Jobs, David Benioff, Leonardo da Vinci, obviously people whom I'm not at all like. I identify as female, I identify as a woman, and how is it that I can move forward but not have people that look like me?
And how has your perspective on gender inequality changed over time?
One of the things that has really struck me so hard, and I find myself cracking up literally every time I go into therapy or talk with my girlfriends, is how do I deal with this? I feel like I'm going crazy. I know you ladies out there have been in a situation where you're speaking and you're talking and you're bringing up that show you're watching, and then all of a sudden the conversation has been taken over and a bunch of guys are now talking about the subject that you literally just brought up. And I find myself as somebody who has the great privilege as presenting as female, as being seen as female in this world, as a transgender woman, that now my voice is quieter. And I never experienced that as a male before.
Wow, that is really powerful, Kaya. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you feel like the centennial of women's suffrage has any particular meaning to you?
The women's suffrage movement was about giving a voice to women out there, was about giving representation and having all these different perspectives be heard from the different experiences that women have had. And in order for us to move forward, just like Speaker Pelosi was saying earlier, when women are empowered, the whole world benefits. When women are moved forward, America prospers. And so what I'm saying is, when transgender women succeed, when queer people succeed, when masculinity and femininity succeed, we all succeed.
What should someone do if they're questioning their gender identity and or sexual orientation?
If somebody is questioning their gender identity, if somebody is questioning their sexual orientation, just like myself, and was feeling in a sad place where you didn't understand anything, I want to let you know that others, like myself, have experienced what you have, and you are not alone.
Well, thank you so much, Kaya. I'd like for people to have an opportunity to ask us questions and get in touch with us. Tell us, how can people ask us a question?
Totally. If you have any questions or any experiences of your own, give us a call, 1-800-287-2722. If you want to be more private, you can message us on Facebook. It doesn't have to be public. Facebook.com/NorCalPublicMedia. If you don't have Facebook, Instagram us, Instagram.com/NorCalPublicMedia. Because I understand social media at this time is very hard to engage with, especially when you're dealing with issues of gender identity and sexual orientation. Find us on Twitter, twitter.com/NorCalPublic. Again, this is Kaya Kramer here on Connect the Bay. We are talking about gender equity and leadership. So one of the questions that we have here in terms of empowerment is, how can women get empowered to position themselves into leadership roles? How can we make more female leaders? Again, this is Kaya Kramer here on Connect the Bay. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kaya. Next, we're going to hear from Kim Churches, the CEO of the AAUW. The organization creates programs for education and training, fostering economic security and leadership skills for women. They talk at Dominican University, and you're going to really enjoy this conversation.
When did you first, as a person, as a leader, get interested in the issue of women's pay equity?
So I always have been interested in inclusion and ensuring that everybody has the right. I really believed and grew up thinking that education was the great equalizer, that if you could aspire to more and you could achieve more through education, the world is your oyster, proverbially so. But sadly, once you enter the workforce, you see sexism, harassment, and the like at every single level. And frankly, this is the first job in my career where I haven't faced overt harassment or sexism of some sort. And I saw it with my colleagues as well. And so while my entire career has not been built around the issues of pay equity or gender equity, it's been something that's been in my craw since the beginning, of knowing that I had to fight a little bit more and a little bit harder than my male colleagues, even when they were side by side with me.
Now that's something that people can be trained to witness, I imagine, whether they're male or female. How do you do that kind of training so people can understand an issue that may be not so easy to grasp?
Yeah, I think for most is really being able to understand where where those biases and those barriers, they start way back in our early years. So, it's nothing wrong with implicit or unconscious bias. All of us have it. Back to the cave people, that's normal. But if you're allowing those biases to cloud your judgment or to make assumptions of human beings, that's where the real issue comes in. And so how to train that is really a matter of unveiling and admitting that we all have natural biases and discriminations in our body. Most of it is protectionism, to make sure we're safe and our families are safe. But so how to call that out in the workplace, how to call that out in our educational systems, how to call that out in society and communities, comes from base understanding of values and understanding of all human beings are capable of great things. And so how to eliminate that so you can make better decisions, take a pause on those biases, allows us to be better. I'll take it one step further, Steve, in that allyship has become a real topic that you're reading a lot about and hearing a lot about these days. And that's that idea that it doesn't just take women to be pushing these issues. It actually is incumbent on all of us, because this is about the economic security of families. This is about America itself, of why equity matters, in that women already have been achieving so much with educational degrees, and yet we're earning less, we're taking on more debt. Why? Why are we not working side by side with men in ways? So these things can be trained. It's about getting the facts out, and it's about ensuring that we're eliminating those biases up front.
When we were talking before, you said you were somewhat hopeful about the future of gender equity, and because of what you're seeing, because of the young women that you're meeting. What makes you hopeful?
So I've just had the benefit of doing some focus groups around the nation in a lot of red, blue, and purple parts of the country. And what was consistent in all of these is this idea that inclusion and intersectionality simply matter in every part of our lives.
You'll have to define intersectionality for some in the audience.
So inclusion, we understand. Diversity and inclusion, although we're still struggling with what these definitions mean. Intersectionality is also that idea that we have many, many different layers to who we are. So you can, you're not just potentially a Black female, you might be the first in your family to graduate from college. You may have grown up with a lower socioeconomic status, and we're all of these things, but intersectionality also deals with the oppression that so many human beings have dealt with for decades and decades and decades. But this idea, essentially for the millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, are simply saying enough. They've grown up in this idea that the world is really becoming much more globally intersected, and that not only are they going to demand it of their employers, not just a value statement on the wall, on a placard, or in an employee handbook, but embedded in the culture. They're going to demand it of their employers, but they're also demanding it with their wallets. And so their consumerism is much more based around this idea of we're all in it together, and we want to see ourselves represented. We want to see what the United States actually looks like today, represented in every hall, in every workplace, in every part of society. And frankly, I didn't have that level of optimism with my own. I'm a Gen Xer, or of the baby boomers, of seeing that level. We complained about it. I mean, Gen Xers are famous for complaining about it, but we didn't do as much. We kind of accepted the paradigm. And where I'm excited by this is millennials and Gen Zers are saying, enough. The world has changed. Let's change with it.
All right, and finally, you're out here for some meetings, of course, and you go all around the country. What are you doing in California?
Yeah. So luckily, we've been doing some fantastic Empower leadership groups with women here to teach them some skills, both on negotiation, but on how to get invited to the table for leadership, how to understand what leadership in the 21st century is all about, what are those skills and assets that you need to add to your acumen so that you can be prepared for 21st century workforce.
All right, and how can people find out more about your organization?
Easily at aauw.org, and if you're interested in the negotiation courses, it's salary.aauw.org.
All right, Kim Churches, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's pick up on some of the themes that Kim Churches laid out. Karin Demarest is back with us. And we're joined by Stephanie Manieri, trustee of the Santa Rosa School Board. At 23, she's a leader who's already making her mark in our community. And when you heard the description of folks in your generation, in the millennial generation, are you having a different experience, do you think, than someone in Kim Church's generation or someone like me who's about 3 times your age?
I really appreciate that question. I think that she definitely hit the mark when she said that millennials have just kind of said enough, and leadership looks differently than it does for maybe generations above us or before us. But what I can say, because I don't speak for all millennials, is that there is definitely a drive and a passion and a willingness to find creative solutions for our problems today.
All right, Karin, you've seen those creative solutions, and you're someone who said, get Stephanie on the show because we really want one of the young leaders in our county. Why were you so excited to have a younger leader on with us today?
Well, I think Stephanie's a perfect representation of her generation, where they're saying, I can do this, and I actually want to do this. And so when she saw the opportunity to step into the school board role, there wasn't a kind of waffling back and forth, but really saying, this is my time, and seizing that. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot from the younger generation, is saying, yeah, it's my time, and I'm going to do it.
Right. The time we're in is very strange. It wasn't so long ago, I think it was weeks or not too much longer than that, where Forbes magazine had a headline, and they said that 100 of the most interesting and innovative business leaders, we're going to introduce you to them, and we're going to put them on the cover. And then after that was all done, someone looked and said, oh, by the way, they chose 99 men and 1 woman. What's that about, Karin?
Well, that's old school thinking. That's what it is. It's that's why we need leaders like Stephanie, so that is just not going to happen, because that's ignorance, it's privilege, it's things that we hope the older generation will wake up to, but if not, we're fortunate to have young people coming up who are going to just take a completely different take on that.
Now, Stephanie, you're starting your political career on the school board. Why the school board? What do you think you're going to be able to accomplish as a member of the school board?
Well, I definitely don't see this as a stepping stone. I didn't think that I wanted to join the school board for any political reasons, nor to be a politician, but I stepped into the role of a board member because this was the first time that the southwest area of Santa Rosa was going to have an opportunity to have a voice on that board. And I grew up in Southwest Santa Rosa, went to the schools in Southwest Santa Rosa, and I definitely want to share my experiences so that, like Karin said, some things that we've seen before just don't happen again.
What one change are you working toward on the school board?
Well, there are several, but I definitely want to encourage more young people to step into positions of leadership. This past Wednesday, we had a school board meeting, and I was able to actually have some of my interns, because I work for an organization and run an internship program, and they were able to come on and talk a little bit about Suicide Prevention Awareness Month and Latino Heritage Month. So I really want to encourage more young people to step into positions of leadership.
Fabulous. We're going to have some tape, and I want to get your both reaction to this in a minute. So first, when we began to think about this program, we made some lists of women that we wanted to talk with, including, of course, the two of you and the great guests we've had already. And soon we realized that our dream guest would be the woman who's one of the most important California leaders of the 20th and 21st century, Dolores Huerta, co-founder of the United Farm Workers. I talked with her 2 weeks ago in Point Reyes at a fundraiser at West Marin Elementary School. Dolores Huerta, thank you so much for joining me today. It's very exciting to be talking with you, because what we're talking about today is women in leadership, especially in the Bay Area in California, and I can think of no other leader in the entire state that I would prefer to talk with than you.
Thank you.
Growing up as a kid in New York City, of course, I knew about the grape boycott and all the things that were happening with farm workers. And I was of the impression at that time that Cesar Chavez was the founder, the one and only founder of the UFW. And now I know for sure that it was the two of you.
Well, I think that's, we might say that that's true about women's history in many aspects. People just always assume that the male is always going to be the leader, and they just don't know. They don't know. And sometimes even when they do know, they kind of forget. So, and that's why I think women, we have to kind of fight for the work that we do, take credit for the work that we do. And it's very difficult because we as women are not used to doing that. We're very used to be accommodating. We don't want to be braggarts or show-offs, or we don't want to be conceited. So we're always too willing to step back or step aside and let someone else take the credit for the work that we do. And even I have to say that I myself found it very difficult to do that for many years, until at some point when I had one of our vice presidents get up and make a report on the work that I had done in New York City on the boycott, and then I had to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, but you didn't do that work. I did that work, you know. But so I think it's a learning curve for women as a whole, and we've got to start educating our young women, our little girls, to have them be, to undo the socialization that has been done for women as a whole. That women have to be the victims, that we have to be the servants, that we have to be the accommodators, that our role is to make men look good instead of saying, no, our work and the work that we do in public service is essential, important. We need women at the table, at every table, in equal numbers, and women's voices are so important, especially now when we have these really challenging and trying times. When we think of the work that we need here in our society right now, we're fighting for our families, we're fighting for our workplaces, we're fighting for our communities, and we're fighting for our planet, you know, for Mother Earth. So I think this is why I think it's easier then for women to take leadership in all of these cases.
Right, and you've also taken leadership in insisting that children be given a sense of their cultures all over the Southwest and everywhere where the Chicano culture has been one that has been, sometimes the school system tries to erase that. And I know you've taken a leadership role in saying we will not erase that part of our culture.
Well, yes, culture is important because it gives people a sense of identity. And if you don't know your own identity, where you came from, where your people come from, and if somehow your culture is seen as something that's inferior or something that's bad, then that makes the child feel inferior and feel bad. And so culture has to be celebrated. One of the things that I'm very driven about is to just ending racism in our society, because I think racism is a cancer that ends up with people not getting the resources that they need, people being poorer, people being discriminated, people being jailed, and as we just saw recently with mass shootings, people getting killed just because they happen to be Mexican or African American or Jewish. I mean, this bigotry has got to end, and the only way that we're going to end it in our society is through education, because people have to learn, number one, that this country was brown. When Europeans came here, it was brown. When later Europeans came here, the country was already built by African slaves and by immigrants from different countries like Mexico and Asia and India, Japan, China, the Philippines. Young people have to learn that in their school books. If we're going to get rid of white privilege and white supremacy and the hatred that comes with those two philosophies, we're going to have to start educating everyone.
Now, one of your current campaigns, I know you were arrested just a few weeks ago in Fresno, and it made me think that so much of the work in our society of caregiving is either badly paid or unpaid and done by women. And it seems like this is a crusade that you're willing to take up at the age of 89 now. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, that's in line with all of the work that I've done for working people to begin with. And we know that so many of these caregivers are not being paid adequately. And just as our child care providers, they're not being paid adequately. So many of these workers have to form a labor organization to be able to get the kind of recognition and the kind of bargaining power that they need. And it's kind of sad in our society that we are the richest country in the world, but we can't pay working people enough. I think as Americans, we can be more compassionate, but we have to understand and we have to have that knowledge to know where all the benefits that we enjoy, like the 8-hour day and safety standards and weekends and workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, all of these, Social Security, that there were working people, there were labor leaders that fought for these benefits. They didn't just come out of the blue. Somebody fought to make sure that we got them.
All right, I want to read something that you said when President Obama gave you the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You said, "The great social justice changes in our country have happened when people came together, organized, and took direct action. It is this right that sustains and nurtures our democracy today. The civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, and the equality movement for our LGBT brothers and sisters are all manifestations of these rights. I thank President Obama for raising the importance of organizing to the highest level of merit and honor." What were you thinking as you were saying those words, as President Obama gave you the highest civilian honor in the country?
Well, that we have to promote organization, because when people come together, that's when they can make changes. And and people that are anti-democratic or anti-democracy, they don't want organization. Because they know that when people do come together, like in labor organizations or women's groups or any other environmental organization, that's when you can really make the changes. And in a democracy, especially in a democracy, it doesn't work if people don't get involved. It doesn't work if people don't vote, if people don't come together to pass the types of laws that we need to protect everybody, and our disabled, our undocumented people, the poor people, seniors. Well, we have to have a democracy that everyone works to make it happen. I think the young people are much more knowledgeable, and what they don't know, they can access in a quick minute on their cell phone or their computer, and they're very good about mobilizing and spreading the messages. And when we see young people that are marching for gun control and for climate change, and we see young immigrants marching for immigrants' rights, and so I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen, and the young people are going to make it happen.
We're very proud. We're going to be broadcasting the Emmy-nominated documentary Dolores, about Dolores Huerta, on KRCB TV 22, Friday, September 20th at 9 p.m. and we're pretty sure that that's going to win the Emmy a couple of days later, so we'll all be having our fingers crossed. Now, Stephanie, she talked about young people and how hopeful she is. What do you hear when you hear a legend like Dolores Huerta talking?
I think it's pretty amazing that, and I recognize that I sit on the shoulders of women like Dolores Huerta who have done amazing work for our people, for all kinds of people in our society. And I'm just grateful that I get to live in the same time period as her and hear her speak in person. She's very inspirational, and I resonate with a lot of what she says about not just being a woman, but a Latina and breaking down social norms that exist in our Latino culture.
Karin, you must be one of those, sort of like me, who might have thought that Cesar Chavez was the one who founded the UFW, and yet it's great that we have lived long enough to know that that's not the case.
I'm so grateful, and I was really honored to be able to see Dolores. She was here in Sonoma County last week, and the simple truth that she speaks is so powerful, and she was saying it in the video there as well, that it's really, change comes from below, and she's saying that we as a people, we are empowered to make change, and her message, it's so inspiring for everyone.
All right, finally, Stephanie, what's next, do you think, for our society? What kinds of things do we need to pull together if we're going to honor women like Dolores Huerta and all the way down to women of your age?
That's a great question, and it's a very big question. I think we need more time to answer that. But I think going back to the idea of inclusivity, I think that there are a lot of places right now where women and people of color are being used as tokens and not really being brought in with the true intention of inclusivity. So I think that we need to really reflect on that and be intentional about what we're doing.
Thanks so much. Now, a few minutes ago, we were at the Berryessa Farmers Market in San Jose talking with women there. And by the way, thank the both of you for coming today. Now we're going to be going to Santa Rosa, and with our assistant news director, Adia White, is going to be with us on the streets asking women in Santa Rosa some questions.
Reina Espinoza Sinsna, Neath Queen and Ton, Trisha Price. I am a Native American from Washington. I just moved here.
Can you tell me about a time where you've held a leadership position and what that was like for you?
Okay, so I have been a representative on a youth council for my tribe, and so we hold a leadership role by staying clean and alcohol-free and leading groups and activities to keep youth, I guess, busy, to do other things other than those.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you feel like being a woman affected your role at all and how people perceived you?
Definitely. I feel like being a woman and being a brown woman definitely makes me care, I think, a lot more about situations and the way I approach people and the way I approach just how I live.
I taught a kindergarten class for 28 years, and I feel although I was in a leadership position that we were also one-on-one, and I just facilitated their creativity and my leadership, let them roll with their specific gifts.
Do you feel like being a woman affected your position at all?
Actually, I think it strengthened it because I think women are stronger than males in a lot of ways, especially emotionally. We can express ourselves because men are uncomfortable doing it, either because of the social, aspect that we're in, or because they were taught you have to be men, you can't talk about things. So I think they're more silent leaders where we can verbalize.
At my school district, there is a new initiative for the whole state of California where 7th through 12th grade has to address human trafficking in some way, and there's really no curriculum out there or available, and so the district asked me to create an anti-human trafficking curriculum, which was a little bit scary, but it was a chance that I had to take on and develop something for the entire school district to present to students. I struggled to find any support in the community. I reached out to different organizations and there just wasn't anything available, so I spent probably about 30 hours just researching and and helping myself feel prepared. It was pretty nerve-wracking to get up in front of the 7th through 8th grade and talk to them about human trafficking, but I think it went well.
Do you feel like being a woman has impacted your leadership role either positively or negatively?
Yeah, I think it's definitely impacted it because I'm a mom and I love being with my kids, but I also like what I do. So trying to find the balance to take on projects like that, but also not take away from my family can be really hard.
Thanks, Addie. It seems like you had a great time going up and down the bay asking questions of these women. First of all, was it tough when you approached women to say what you wanted to talk about? Did they say yes right away, or did you have to pick and choose?
Well, we definitely did a lot of picking and choosing. I spoke with a lot of women who were very unsure whether or not they wanted to participate and didn't see themselves as leaders. I think that was the biggest barrier. Once women did recognize that they were leaders, then they generally were pretty open to wanting to talk and sharing their experiences.
That's fascinating because I think all of us, men and women, are leaders in different parts of our lives. And what we're learning today is that women in leadership just have a lot to teach each other and a lot to teach us as well.
Absolutely, Steve. And I was just so blown away by all of the different projects that people were working on. I mean, I met the counselor who's working on a human trafficking initiative, spoke with a lot of young women in tech. So I was just really blown away by all of the array of different leadership projects that the people I spoke with were taking on.
Sure. What was different about young women in tech?
Well, we heard a lot of not really noticing the barriers that they face as women. And one of the women brought up the point that she works remotely, so she doesn't have to do a lot of face-to-face interaction with some of the people that work under her. And she said that that has been really helpful for her because she doesn't get a lot of the pushback that she might in other ways, being in a boardroom or whatnot.
All right, Addie, thanks a lot, and it seems like you had a great time there. And that's it for this edition of Connect the Bay. We're going to post the show online so you can watch again. And if you want to get in touch with us, find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or on the web, norcalpublicmedia.org. Write to us if you'd like, news@norcalpublicmedia.org. And we hope to see you every time we do these shows. So thanks a lot, Addie. That was really fabulous.
We'll see you in 2020 for the next edition of Connect the Bay.